Hello, everybody. How are you guys? I'm sorry for the delay. It was me.
That's
I'm the problem. It's me.
like I
Um,
told Tiff, it is okay.
I'm having some technical difficulties this morning, and not even computer related. They're just personal. So I hope everybody's doing good. I hope everybody's doing okay. I'm gonna let Nia go ahead and introduce herself, and then I will jump in and kind of introduce myself and talk about what it is that we're gonna be kind of working with today. So Nia, take it away.
Hi, I am Nia the Vixen of Fiction all over the internet. I do writing streams on Tuesday nights here on YouTube, and I also am over on Twitch, so you can follow me there. I write historical fiction, sci-fi, fantasy, and romance, and I love to mix the genres. And I'm very excited today. I love world building, so today we're going to be talking about building coming up with the history of your small town, just some tips and ideas to get you started if it is something that you need for your small town. So I'm really excited. Tiffany.
Yay! And hello, everybody. I am Tiffany TL Russ on all the interwebs, or TL Russ Lifestyle, rather, on all the interwebs. I write under TL Russ, as well as Des Lorre. And guys, we are going to be talking, as Nia said, about developing the history of your town. And if you don't know, Small Town World came out of our being part of the Romance Writers Room, which is a spinoff of the actual Writers Room, which I started with Barrett Laurie and Morgan Lee. And what we do is we just talk about how to put together your small town, different tips, tricks, ideas, things that can help you as you're building your small town. Because we think everybody should have a small town. And it's not just small towns, like if you're building an actual city or wherever it is that you're building for your fiction, we are here for you. So, as Nia said, we are going to be talking about the history of your town, but I'm going to go through the comments here for a second. Uh, Looks like this is Rachel, right?
That is Rachel.
Okay, yeah. My head's not all together today, so that's why I was like, I feel like this is Rachel. But Rachel's first. Nia obviously saying hello and letting you guys know we will be right there. I was finishing my breakfast. That's why we were late. I'll take full on responsibility for it. Renee is here saying hi. And then we have Eva coming in saying hi. I just got home and got some snacks and food to address my dropping blood sugar. Oh, don't let that happen. So perfect timing from my
POV, you got this.
And I have a small town in my middle grade. Awesome. So
Hey.
the way this works is that it is similar to a podcast. We are going to kind of give you some ideas. I'm not going to necessarily pop up all of the comments here or there. And if you have any questions, by all means, put them in and just put a Q or question before all caps before it so that I know. And then we'll take like the last 10 to 15 minutes and kind of go over any questions that you guys might have. So, yeah. So let's dive in. I have a small town in, actually, I have
How many small towns?
a small town. We have a small town in Des Lorre. As far as TLRS is concerned, I actually have a plethora of small towns that I am putting together. I actually just merged one town, I think. I merged two towns for an upcoming series that's coming this summer. If I get everything together and get it correct. So this is almost perfect timing for me because this is actually a little bit of where I am in the building of that town. Um, which is called Cherish Springs, just so you guys know.
I love that
Uh,
name.
but this is kind of where I'm at in that world. But I think you have two, right? Or do you have three?
I have two. I currently am working on two worlds, and there are at least 2 small towns in each world because of destination purposes. But the main towns, yes, I have 2 main small towns, one for codename Penny, and which is my pen name stuff, and I do have one for Ethereal Falls, which is a small town in Mysterial County, and it is a
You
small
also
college town.
have, and this is a very interesting idea, and that's why I said this, what we're talking about today, can apply to multiple things, whether it's not even a small town or not, because I would almost classify, I know you have your sci-fi world, and
Yes,
I've
and
seen some
I
of what it
consider
is
that.
that you've done there, and this could work easily for something like that, in some of
Absolutely.
the questions and some of the ideas.
Yes. So I know that a lot of the stuff that we talk about, we say small town, but it can work for in for both my pen name and for my Vixen fiction work. There's also cities that go along, and some of these cities also have somewhat extensive backgrounds to let me to kind of guide me if these things come up, especially if you've got construction workers and developers, if some of your heroes, your male MCs, if they're in that, then and that has come up. That comes up in the series that I have coming up because 2 of the brothers are in construction. So what they both do, one working in the city, one working in the small town, and the 2 of them, coming together as half brothers, finding love in a small town. Their occupations do come up, and so I needed to know a little bit about what's going on with where they're from and why one's working in one place and one is working in our small town. And it helps to know some of the history, because as they're working in the small town, and developing or not, the places that they're it helps to know why one place is just like sparkly new, everything shiny, and why one place is like, no, we're preserving everything. And I think I've hinted at that in my newsletter. um, of one of the places that is highlighted in my newsletter is a theater that's being worked on. um, and so these having knowing the history of your town can help you if you have characters who that is relevant to their story. And then that way, once you have that solidified, say
Mhm,
I've got another couple that's coming up in the next series, and he's from a founding family. So how the history of the town plays
mhm,
in with his life and where he's at and the decisions he's making, just know having that history. And it doesn't have to be like super detailed. Tiffany and I tend to do a lot. You don't have to do a lot. It could be a bullet point, it could be
mhm.
bullet points, but just having that history can help you when you're coming up with stories and the things that might be interfering in your character's love life, or if you're not doing romance. We're talking romance mainly, but just the points of conflict within the story, conflict with other people in the town who might not like that
Mhm.
new stranger coming into their town, different things. So just knowing a little bit about the history of your town can really enhance a little bit your stories.
And you also touched on a really good point when you were talking about why, say, one specific town doesn't want things to change, because
Mm-hmm.
also knowing the history can play into the culture of your town,
Yeah.
um, how the people act, how they react to strangers, how they know whether they're welcoming or they're not. Whether they're open to diversity or they're not.
Mm-hmm.
Knowing the history of that town, we were just talking about one of the towns that I was going to use as an example, but there's a lot of stuff going on in the history of that town that plays into why some of the residents that are still there act certain ways, or why certain areas look a certain way, why certain areas, have been abandoned, because of the history of that town and what has happened in the past and like all of that. So that plays a huge part in you kind of think, oh, well, I'm writing, contemporary, or whatever. I'm not writing historical. But, if you have a town where you've had people who are living there for generations,
Mm-hmm.
some of that history is passed down,
Yeah.
especially in a small town. I think way more than in a big city. A lot of that history is passed down.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think both Nia and I do this where we tend to have founding families in our town, like people
Mm-hmm.
who have like helped to establish the place.
Yes.
And for me, that's one of the big first things that I look at is like, who are the founding families? What brought them to this spot? Why did they settle here? How did they create it into a town? Just because there's like three people does not a town make, as far as I know. I mean, I don't know. Maybe there is a town somewhere that's a town of three. But I tend to look at that. Where do you start, Nia, when you're building your towns?
Um, Most of the times I start in the past. I'm a world builder first, and uh, then come to characters. So I create a world, and then I start thinking. My brain just starts thinking as I'm developing the world. Who lives in this place? What are the conflicts? And then I start thinking of, what if there was such and such girl, and she's got to go through this, and this is the world that she lives in. So I have this girl now who's going through these things, and she lives in this place where X, Y, or Z is happening. So that's how I start. um, Both. Okay, so for my pen name story, it started with a what was going to be a novella turned out to be a full length, over 100K word novel. Um, but I had all of these side characters. So once I take out all the side characters and telling too much of their stories, I had all of these characters who had their own things going on, and which would make these perfect short stories.
Mm,
So in coming up with it, I actually started out with the place that she inherits. And so because she inherits it, I'm always thinking about, where did the things come from? I'm also someone who absolutely loves history. I will watch documentaries all day long. So that always fascinates me. How did her parents? Oh, the parents got it from the grandparents. Well, how did the grandparents come up with it?
mm-hmm,
So I'm always, before I can even get to where she's at, I'm always thinking about how she got here and who she came from. So I always am going back until I get to a point where this is the story. This is where we start. This is how she gets this is where the inheritance basically comes from. And from that, I came up with this whole place. So then there are people in this place. So when she finds herself in this place trying to do this thing, people are like, is she a stranger? No, this was her grandparents or her parents. And so
mm-hmm,
I have these people who are set in their ways or have their ideas about things, and now she's interacting with these people trying to do this thing, and in comes handsome dude that now their sparks are flying. So that's kind of the long way that my stories work. Sometimes I wish I could just pants and just like, oh, here's a girl and here's a guy, let's write their story and then worry about everything else later. And if you can do that, I applaud you, because I totally admire people who can pants those stories. I wish I could do it so bad, but that is a long process. And one of the reasons why it takes me so long to put out ones, I would say it takes me so long to start putting out the stories, but once I have all of that, then things move along a little bit quicker. So I don't know if that's helpful to people, the way that I work, but I can come up now. I can come up with a couple just like that. I'm like, oh, I have this place here. He works here. She's from this family, or vice versa, and boom, I'm gonna just throw these two people together and let's play with them. Let's see what happens. Our sparks are gonna fly, or maybe they're gonna be rivals. Because I have this place. It's literally like playing Sims with my story. I'm just grabbing people and like, you two kiss. you know.
I love that. You know what's really funny is that I have found, okay, so with Peach Ridge, which is the TL Russ story in the small town, I did do a lot of, I didn't do extensive building, you know, as far as like building the town, because let's be real, it wasn't until like someone's walking down the street, I was like, oh, we need a bookstore. Um, but like there were small places that I was just kind of like, I did forget, you know, like I built a lot of the town ahead of time, which generally I am more of pantser in my writing. Um, but I needed to know certain things. You know, like I knew there were certain things that I was going to need for the dynamics of the stories that I wanted to tell. And so, and because I had a city or a town in mind of what this town looked like, I had a general idea of some of the things that I wanted there.
Mm-hmm.
With the Des Lorre Orion Harbor story, we have pantsed a lot of that bad boy. We had this wonderful plan of how we were going to, you know, like at the beginning of the year, we were going to sit down and we were going to create this town and come up with all the different stuff in it and all this stuff. And then we were going to start writing all the stories. And we started writing like the Thanksgiving story and just, I don't remember how. I think I was the one who was like, okay, so where are we setting this story? And do we want it to be in the new town that we had kind of came up with the name for, and a legend, if you will, um, for the town? And Des was kind of like, oh. And so then as we were writing it, we were like, this person works at the bookstore. I guess we have a bookstore. His
Yeah.
best friend runs the coffee shop. I guess we have a coffee shop. Like we're just typing. We're like, oh, she's got to get a turkey. Let's give him a butcher. You know, type of thing. And I have found, I don't want to say it's been a little bit more difficult with the Des Lorre, but it has been more like I can tell you half the stuff off the top of my head that's in Peach Ridge. Like, don't even have to look at anything, don't even have to do stuff. There are times Des and I are messaging each other and we're like, did we come up with this? Did we come up with that? Like, I told her one of the characters in the news story is staying at the hotel. She's like, oh, we got to name it. I was like, we did name it. She's like, we did? Because like it's not as set in our heads, I
Yeah.
think, as whereas Peach Ridge was, because I spent so much, and not a lot of time, but I spent the time like putting it together, figuring it out, you know, like developing this history of it, um knowing why it is in a particular location, what the whole thing of it. And this is a thing, and I think this is something we touched on last time. Towns evolve, so your history, your legends, your lore, all of that is going to evolve, even if you come up with it at the beginning. You
Mm-hmm.
know, like I said, I didn't realize I need a bookstore. Oh, look, Dream Books popped up.
Yeah. And that's an important thing to know, that you don't have to know and have everything right now. Basically, we say this even when with building your maps and everything. Just start with what you need. For
Mhm.
some of us, I want to raise my hand. This is the fun part, so I do a lot more because it engrosses me in the world, and I have fun with it. But I always tell people, if it stresses you out, dial it back and start with what you
Mhm.
need, and then keep notes of the things. Like if you mention that your town was founded in a year, please write that down.
Oh, yes.
And that's how you're going to start with building the history. If you're pantsing it along, and you mention something about the history of your town, or something happened in the 70s, just jot that down and
Mhm.
have like a blank world building document. right? It's
Mhm.
got nothing in it because you're pantsing the story. But every time you say something that references something that happened 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 100 years ago, just jot those down so that you have that reference, so that then you don't accidentally change it somewhere down the line
Mhm.
and be like, wait, I thought that this, you mentioned this, but now you're saying that your town popped up out of nowhere because some guy started fishing and built a shack, and so it's a fishing town. But you said like 5 stories ago that you were having a Founders Day party or something, and it was like 1792, and then people are like, that's two different things. But you're like, oh snap, I did say that that was a founding day party, not just a regular historical party.
Mhm.
Because our we've got like tons and tons of things going on. Our minds are here, there, and everywhere. It, when you make references to things like that and something similar might come up in a future story, you want to have those notes so that you can go back and look back. And then what'll happen is you'll be writing and you'll be like, oh, I'm saying that this Fisher dude just founded this town, let me write it in my notes. And then you'll see in your notes, oh snap, I already put
Uh-huh.
that. So maybe he didn't found the town, maybe something different that
Absolutely.
that is of similar relevancy. Maybe he just squatted and took the property, and people didn't know he was there for so long that all of a sudden this dude has like 50 acres, and they're like, how did he get that? Because he squatted on it. Just change it up a little, so
Mhm.
that it still makes your story relevant, or his part in the story relevant, without messing up the continuity of your story.
Example of that would be A Town Called Christmas. I did pants 90 something percent of, like 98.7.6.5% of that. Uh, but I knew what I wanted because it's a series of short stories, and I knew what I wanted the last short story to entail. Um, what I did not know is how I would get there. And so when I got there, and I knew that I wanted this rivalry between these two families. Again, had no clue why there would be this rivalry between the two families. I just knew I needed one person from this family and one person from this family to fall in love.
Mm-hmm.
And I, again, no clue how I was going to get there, no clue any of it, nothing whatsoever. And I'm writing the first paragraph, and I think I get to the end of it, and I was like, I gotta go back and rework the history of the town. And so what I did was kind of added in this whole layer of mystery and mystique into the town, but I did it in a way that it was like, "Oh, you've not heard this story? Let me tell you what some people believe happened at the beginning of this town." And so, like, sometimes you can do something like that where you and I did have to find the places where I could interweave it into what I had
Mm-hmm.
already established in the other 11 stories of how the town grew, and how I could, like, make it flow into why now this would be an issue for this couple. But it's a very interesting spot when you get there and you're like, I thought I knew the history of my town. Oops. And
Yep.
that's a good point as well. Like, think of what legends or what lore you might want your town to have. Um, Orion Harbor is named Orion Harbor for a reason that we haven't fully touched on yet with the stories, but there is a legend or a lore, if you will, as to why. Which is also the reason that it's set in a specific location. So think of those type of things when you were coming up with the history of your town. Like, what kind
Mm-hmm.
of I'm in a big city, and let me tell you, there's still like those urban legends of
Oh
things.
yeah.
So by all means, like, those are really good things to think of as well. Um, when you were coming up with kind of that history. What's one of the things that you kind of think of, Nia, when you're sitting down and you're like, okay, so I know I got this place and I know I got um, this specific location. How are we going to get to a town?
Um,
Or the
honestly,
history of,
um,
rather.
so I won't talk too much about Codename Penny, but their story takes place in a specific region where it has a fairly rich history, but the history starts at a different time than, say, the history of Mysterial County, because Mysterial County is in the Connecticut, Massachusetts area. So it wouldn't make sense for it to start later when that area was being very much colonized at the time. So I had to incorporate that it happened, that the town was founded during this time. The fun thing with Mysterial County is that because it's a little bit magical, um, I things have to happen at a certain time, but there's magic and a little bit of mystery going on
Mm.
with how things how things come together, and we have one of the characters that's going to be coming up soon, who his family was the founding family, but he's technically the child of that founding family, but because he's I believe he's a gnome descendant, so he's actually their lifespans are different. So it's actually him, and it will be him for quite a while until he has a child to pass it on to, and then he can pass on into their next realm. So it's funny because several of the characters that you'll get to meet have been there for a long time. Two of my older ladies who are talking about how um, it's the end of their life and it's the end of the road for them. But because they're these mythical creatures, they've actually got like 30 more years. So we're like, it's not the end. But for them, when you live for hundreds of years, you're like, oh, we've only got 30 years left. What are we gonna do with with our last few days?
We have a character, well, in all fairness, she doesn't say it. We have a character, Grandma Betty. We always reference Grandma Betty with Orion Harbor. We love Grandma Betty. Um, she never says it, but like everybody around, like what is it? William's mom is like, Grandma Betty is getting older. We don't know how much longer we have with her. And like all the grandkids, because their parents always use this as like their thing to get them to do stuff. Like all the grandkids are like, she's gonna outlive us all. What are you talking about? And so we do have fun with, because nobody really knows how old
How
Grandma
old?
Betty is. So we just have so much fun with Grandma Betty. We're just
Yes.
like,
And these older characters can be a lot of fun because they can pull stuff out of nowhere that gives the reader a little hint of the history, while we're continuing with whatever
mhm,
the story is, because they're just hilarious sometimes, you know. So
mhm.
I love my older characters that are usually in my stories. Again, if you find Codename Penny, don't say anything. Usually my older people are the ones that are like really pushing for the younger couple to get together. The parents are defiant and sometimes and just like no. But the old grandmas and aunties are just like, y'all so cute together. Like they're a little bit of
Um,
me. Just kiss. Just kiss.
that's also a very good point as well, is look at well, I guess you could say the historians or the custodians of your town history. You always, at least for me, and obviously for Nia, I like to have somebody who is that. In Peach Ridge we have the Woods and the Hills. The Hill family owns the orchard. The Woods family owns the horse saloon, and it's always a debate depending on which one of them you ask. which one of their families founded the town.
I love that. I love
You
that.
know, they have that push pull. And I mean, even to the point, like, one of the other characters is talking to Mr. Hill, and he's like, well, maybe I should take her over to Miss Jolene and let her tell her the history. And he's like, Jolene doesn't know anything. She just thinks she knows everything. You know, because it's that push pull of which one of us really did it. Like, you always want to try to have those custodians of
Mm-hmm.
your family lore, your family histories, and your town histories,
Yeah.
to kind of play around with. They're always fun.
Yeah, because they are part of your families, but they are the custodians of your town,
Hmm.
telling the story. That maybe the main characters don't get to tell because they're doing their romancy thing, in the case of our
Hmm.
romances. Um, but they're the ones that when they're going somewhere, they'll be like, I remember back when I was your age, and you know, it only had this, and and we had to walk to get there, and we had, and just like, and
We
it'll
only had
just
one shoe
little fun
between
things.
us.
Yep. And
That was my great grandmother's
that'll give
favorite
you
thing.
a sense of depth of some of the places within your story while being included in the story without, feeling like an info dump. Like, I would read, this town was founded in such and such a time, but I would read that, but most readers don't want to
Hmm.
read that. Most readers aren't like me, so don't do that. You want to sprinkle in these things. And it also, I feel like the town and a lot of our small town romances and our stories in general that are done in this vein, the town is a character in the
Hmm.
story, and in a lot of
Hmm.
ways. It is the one character that's always there.
Hmm.
If you're writing a small town, you
It's
you
kind of the
might see,
backbone.
yeah, they're the backbone. You might see Bobby Joe sprinkled out. Bobby Joe might get their own story in one here, but then you might see maybe Bobby Joe sprinkled here and there in the background at a party, at a family function, but the town is always there.
Hmm.
So it's nice when your readers start feeling like they're invested in the town,
Yes.
like we got invested in a town called Christmas because it was so sweet.
Um, thank you. Thank you. Uh, we're done with the town called Christmas. I just got to figure out how we're working a town called Christmas into TLS. But
That was not me hinting that I can't wait for more.
I know I've heard it multiple times, a lot of the conversation. Um, One of the other things that you guys could do, and it's one of the things that I don't think a lot of people think of, is look at the towns in the area that you are setting, like the actual towns, legitimately, in the areas that you are setting it in. You know, like if you're setting a town, I'm from Missouri. If you're
Mhm.
setting a town in Missouri, like you could look at a Branson, you could look at a jo- Joplin, you could look at a Poplar Bluff, you could look at um Columbia. It's a college town, but it's still considered a small town, if you
Mhm.
will. So you can look at like certain areas. Like, again, I've said towns in Colorado because I've lived there. If I'm doing a mountain town in Colorado, I'm looking at like, an Estes Park or a Durango, or um if it's a ski town like a Aspen or a Vail, because those will give you some ideas not only to what need needs to or could be in your town, but also give you an idea of the history of how those towns came to be. And then you can kind of work your history, around that vein, or be like, oh, I like this part of this story and I like this part of this story. How can I
Mhm.
then switch it around and make it what works for me
Yep.
in my story? So those are some good ideas as well.
Yep. I always check out the towns that are similar to what I feel like my
Hmm.
town should be, that are in the general vicinity, the actual towns that are in the general vicinity of where my fictional town is, um, because that is really the best way to get an idea of what you might be able to do, and what your town is fictional. but there may be some things that, even with it being fictional, that people will be like, huh, how is that happening? I'll use a silly example. If your town is on the East Coast and it's a beachy town, that sunrise is happening um in a certain direction. You don't want
Mm-hmm.
them having their house facing a different way and getting a sunrise. Just little things, but think of that on a different scale, where you don't want to just for no reason take the reader out of your romance, when the focus should be the romance, not that couldn't happen in that area. They
Yeah.
don't have earthquakes up there, or earthquakes are so rare that why did we
Oh,
choose earthquake instead of choosing any of the other many things that happen in this area? You picked the wrong one, because now everybody's like, it just feels odd. So you don't, you know what I mean? You just
yeah.
want to know a little bit about the area that you're placing your fictional town in. I had a issue where I wanted to make sure I could have a snowstorm in one particular area, because it's romance. I gotta have a snowstorm. So I'm like, do they get? I just had to look up, and I literally looked up the weather pattern histories. You don't have to do it. I mean, I know, but yeah,
But also look
I
up
look up
weather
weather
for
pattern
your
history
area.
of towns in that area, so I could see. Oh yes, they do get snow. It doesn't seem like it when you think of what the area is, but yes, legit, they get snow, and they get snow often. So it totally makes sense.
Just
Where if
also
you
as a reminder though, do look up the weather
the
of
weather,
your area, wherever
yeah,
it is that you are setting your town. Because I've done that myself, where I had someone in like a t-shirt in January, and then all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute, would that be right? And I've
yeah,
done the reverse, where I've had them in a jacket in like, January, and again in that area they wouldn't have one. So yeah, be sure you're looking it up.
unless they're like the coldest blooded person, unless they're me, they're not they're not wearing a jacket. Yeah, I'm the only person in my family who's like got a jacket on all year long, but that's okay.
Oh, that's fun.
But yeah,
um Another
so
thing you
history
guys,
of weather patterns might be a good one if you're
yes.
dressing your people. That might be something you might want to know.
Another thing that you can consider is, and I know Nia and I both, when we're kind of coming up with our towns, and simply because, let's be real, small towns sometimes live and die based on the industry that is
Yep.
incorporated in that town. Whatever that industry may be, even if it's tourism. If tourism dries up, there the town is gone. So sometimes look at what that main industry of that town is. When did it open? Like, who brought it there? Is this when the town became a town?
Yeah.
Is this when people moved in? Like, a lot of people don't know the casinos are not what started Vegas.
Yeah.
you know.
And
Uh,
here's the thing talking to somebody about before. Uh, your towns can't just run on the coffee shops and the library. There
mhm,
needs to be people who go to the coffee shops and the libraries.
mhm,
So it might be nice to have a factory or a plant or something like that,
mhm,
so that as you're talking about your librarian maybe doing their job, you know there are people, so like Bobby comes in from working at the factory every day. He doesn't you wouldn't think that he reads, but he comes to get his romance novel. Just little cute
mhm.
quirky things, and then maybe she looks up thinking that it's Bobby, but now it's handsome guy coming in, or maybe Bobby is the dream
Handsome
guy
guy
and they
coming in.
bond over books. He's like, I never would have thought Bobby from the plant, you know.
Like, maybe he didn't come in from the plant today. Maybe he came in all dressed all cute.
Yeah, just for you. Yeah. So it's nice. It's good to have something else going on,
Mhm.
as far as where people are working. If it's a farm town, people there, it could be that the farming industry is the industry, and that
Yeah,
works perfectly fine.
yeah.
Um, you
And
take
again,
it
in that
to
sense, like, look, Missouri has lots of open spaces. Missouri is not what you would consider a ranch city or a ranch state, So this may not be if you're going to build a cattle ranch or something like that. Missouri might not be the state you want to locate it in. Like you might want to move a little bit down Oklahoma, maybe, uh, or something like that. But also, a lot of people don't know we are huge for wineries. So look also at that when you're coming up with like your industry and the history of and where you're locating your town. Make sure that you are checking, you know, like I don't know if I would put a tobacco farm or make the history of our town be tobacco farming if I was putting it in, say, like Idaho. That's not really a space that you think of as they had a history of having tobacco farms. But
Right.
if you were going to
Where
put it
that
in,
would be perfect for here.
exactly.
And there are a lot of towns that have kind of like gone ghost town because uh, when because the tobacco industry in some of these areas just dried up or had to really be consolidated because there's just things changed from the 70s to now, where these towns were popping here in North Carolina. You can drive through some of them, and the buildings that like you almost like this was a town. It's very interesting and eerie, kind of cool, but also that's exactly how it works. I mean, I think you see it all over, like um, places up where the car industry was really big, and when some of those jobs went away, that these big, beautiful houses that
Mm,
are just like going to waste. So that could be a part of it. Maybe someone you're trying to you have a small town that's trying to be revitalized, but the industry,
mm-hmm,
if when an industry goes, if another one doesn't come, people are going to leave. They can't stay where there are no jobs.
exactly.
So you want to think about that. If your town only has a coffee shop and a general store, um,
Again, three
who are the
people do
people?
not a town make.
Yeah, who are the people? Where are they coming from? How is your cafe not gone under? Or is that part of the struggle? Everybody's left,
Yeah.
and now you're trying to hang on to your cafe. So you meet the billionaire guy who's just okay. Let me stop.
We're gonna give you a whole story. Another good thing to do is look up. Okay, so I have a paranormal story that I needed a reason why my family would have come over from England
Mhm.
um, to the U.S. and I knew the time frame that I wanted them to come. I knew some of the things that I needed to happen, but I couldn't have them in one specific spot until a little bit later. So I actually started looking up histories of that particular time frame, like what was going on in the US in that time frame. One of them was the gold rush. So
Mhm.
I shipped my little family off to Colorado and then off to California and then back to Colorado.
Yep.
Uh, so, like look at certain things and especially because I needed them to have found a specific stone. So I needed somewhere where they were like it worked out because I was like, ooh, they could have been digging and then they found the stone and then there we go. And yes, this makes sense. Uh,
Yes. The
like look at certain things like that when you sometimes are coming up with the history.
Yes, the gold rush, and that era is a great way to
Mm-hmm.
get people to a certain location and to get a town developed. And especially if you want a diverse town, it's because if
Yeah.
you think of all the people who came together to make this happen, and in our real history, it wasn't great for all the people that came together to make it happen. But what else? But your town is fictional. You can make it better.
Yes. Definitely. Same with like in the sense of what Nia started with the billionaire that, builds the town. Think of like how many small towns or even towns in general started because the train industry opened up in those areas.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, and we were just talking about, like lumber mills and steel mills and, you know, like all types of industrial industry. Those sprung up, but they sprung up around train tracks.
Yeah.
So just look up old train tracks and maybe that's where your town started. If you have something that's an industrial type of town.
And that's a great way to have rival families as well.
Ooh,
If you
yes.
have one family who was big on bringing in the industry and making money off of it, and then the other family that was working for it, and like their people, because are the people who populated the town, so they feel like they built the town, but maybe the remnants of who's the descendants who are now in the current stories, there's that rivalry
Mm-hmm.
between the haves and the have-nots that started way back when, until Johnny and Becky Sue fall in love and families must come together. Okay, let me stop.
I'm gonna jump into a couple of quick questions here that we have.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, Angel Faye, love that your novel, The Main MC, is from a small town that you have invented because that is
Yes.
why we're here. We love that. We also had some people come in, Angel Faye as well as Avery. So hello all. This question: can a small town have police station and fire department? I would suggest yes.
Yes, and I
Mostly.
would suggest that makes for great future
Mhm,
stories. Ma'am,
mhm,
absolutely, please do.
yes.
They eat those stories out.
Now you can change certain things. Like maybe it's not a police station, maybe it's the police department because
Mm-hmm.
maybe they don't have enough to support a full
Mm-hmm.
station.
Yes,
Maybe it is a
a
fire
sheriff's department.
brigade. Yeah, a sheriff's department. Maybe it's a fire brigade, or maybe it's a volunteer fire
Mm-hmm.
fighter kind of
Yep.
unit. And again, you can do the research. I don't know exactly what size town you
Exactly.
know has either of those, but also in the sense of both of those, especially with the police station, by all means look it up because not every town has, say, like a police chief. Some of them have
Mm-hmm.
sheriffs, some of them have chiefs, some of them have lieutenants, like they rangers, if you will.
Yeah.
So there's like different levels that depending on your city is
Mm-hmm.
going to be what it is because I had to look that up for Peach Rich as far as
Yes.
my person, what would his title be
Yeah, like
in that
we're
town.
in a smaller town, but big compared to some small towns. We have a full police department and sheriff's department, but the next town over has two.
Exactly.
It's only two of them. But the sheriffs and the troopers help patrol the highways and some of the
Hmm.
areas. So there's some delegation of responsibilities, but the town is just so small that it would really only support having two police officers.
Yeah, I think there's only in my head I feel like there's like 5 police officers in Peach Ridge, not counting the head guy.
Yeah,
um
and I say we have a full police department. Some other bigger towns or bigger cities will be like, that's not full. But I like for us, it's good because it feels like a lot. But
in all fairness, there's 5 police officers in my station because I know there's a police officer series coming up, and I need at least 4, and I already hooked up one of them. So there had to be 5. Uh, so think about it sometimes in that respect. But if your town's really small and maybe you can't have, like, it wouldn't realistically, even though again these are fictional towns, do as you will,
mhm.
support 5 police officers, then maybe your series is emergency services. And so then you have maybe 2 people who are firemen, one person that's
Yep.
a paramedic, and one person that works at the police station or something like that. So look at it that way and figure that part out a little bit. One of the other questions, and I love this one, Renee asked, I combine industries like winery, ranch, horses, or lodge with cabins. I'm going to answer the lodge with cabins by telling you to look up YMCA of the Rockies. It is a great way of seeing how somebody has done that, because they have, it is legitimately like a whole, like almost town in and of itself. Like they have a lodge where they do, like retreats for businesses and Girl Scouts and
Hmm.
churches and all kinds of other stuff. But then they also have little cabins that people and families can rent, like to have their own little space. But then they have like the main area that, has like basketball courts and like swimming pools and like all kinds of stuff. So absolutely you
Yeah.
can. Same, we have a winery in Missouri that I don't know if they have horses, but they do have animals.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah.
We do too here in North Carolina, but I would say for the sake of your story, if you want to keep the stories going, if there's some separation where, or like maybe the winery is next to a ranch, so that if
Mm-mm.
you need to get more stories, whereas if you make everything in one place, you almost a little bit are limiting yourself. But yes, you absolutely can. There are wineries that have horses and things like that, so
And you can
totally,
always make it
totally do
like
it.
just one huge family. Maybe one part
Mhm.
of the family owns the winery, another part of the family owns the horse ranch.
Yeah, that way you get a little bit more of a split, and you can
Hmm.
generate more stories if that's what you need, or if
Yeah.
that's what you're reaching for, is that you you might not want to be like, oh, I feel like I've told these stories for this place, and I wish now that I had another
Hmm.
place. Now I have to come up with another place where maybe if I'd have just maybe given a little bit of separation, I could have a whole family here and a whole family here, or different workers,
Yeah.
ranch hands over here, but maybe some people working on a winery there. Just something to think about, depending on how far you want to go with your short stories. Um, but you can combine them for sure.
When you said the whole like the ranch and the thing, it almost made me think of Anheuser-Busch, because we have that here, where like what is it, like you have the Bush beer, which is
Mhm.
like their distillery, and they do a whole bunch of stuff like downtown Missouri. But then they also have the Clydesdales, which
Yep.
is like their ranch that's like way, it's not way out, but it's a bit of a drive. It's
Yeah.
definitely not downtown. um, and that's where like the horses and like their animals and like everything else is, but it is all just under the Bush family.
Hmm.
So like that is an option as well.
Yes.
I think there was another question, but I might have missed it. Oh, a small town has up to 5,000 people, right? So it could
I
be a bigger town.
They're different sizes. I have it
Yeah.
written down somewhere. Let me see if I can find the document really quick. But yeah, you can absolutely Google it. I don't know if I can find the document where I
Oh.
have.
Oh, Avery, you're so fun. It took me a second because I clicked that and then I saw I forgot the Q. And so then she put it back. A small town is up to 5,000 people with the Q.
Yeah,
So, uh,
we
I
got
love
you, Avery.
that.
But there are
Yeah.
categories of small town. Um, I believe Google is accurate because I think that's where I got mine from, and they pulled it from a source, or I Googled it, and then from Google I went to an actual source. But there is a source that will tell you the category of
Hmm.
small towns, what even is a village. And I'm like, did I accidentally make a village? Like no. Or sometimes I feel like, oh, did I put too many people in this small town? Like, because I think sometimes of a small town, like everybody knows everybody, but not necessarily. Sometimes everybody knows someone who knows that person. Like I
Hmm.
don't know you directly, but I know your cousin who also, you know what I mean? It's a little bit bigger, small town.
Also, another great thing that you can do, like there's a travel couple that I watch, and during the pandemic, they decided to do like one of those van things where they like built their home inside the van, um, and traveled around. Uh, and they actually went almost searching for like these random things. And all I just remember is I think they did actually go to a spot that it was legitimately a town of one person. Um, and offer it was like one building, one person. It wasn't, like a full what we consider a town. But you can like Google some stuff like that, like small towns,
Mhm.
or YouTube, and it might give you some ideas of like, I think I did that when I was looking at setting up my town in Georgia. I just looked up small towns in Georgia to get an idea of what what type of small towns might be in Georgia, what they might look like, how they might operate, like why would they be there? Kind of a conversation. So yeah, that's one as well. Renee also had another question, for like wealthy families with family companies for rivals in their industry. Could that work in small towns or bigger cities? That definitely works in small towns. Uh,
Okay, so
uh,
according to the census, the minimum population of a small town is 5,000 people. So that's where you start. Um,
okay.
and then a village apparently is something like 1,000 to 3,000, roughly
Hmm.
1,000 to 2,500. So
Interesting.
if your town's that small, you got a village on your hands.
Interesting. I may have to up Ridge's size. I think it might be a village. That's hilarious. I did not know that. But very cool. I think for okay, so here's the thing with a small town and using it as like number one, most small towns do have at least some type of wealthy family that feels as though they own the town or contributes to the town or helps the town in some kind of way, especially in books. Like, I don't know about in real life, but in books, movies, TV shows, yeah, there's a wealthy family of some sort that lives, off somewhere, and everybody's like, ooh, the Joneses, type of conversation. Whether they love or hate them, it's something. As far as the rival industry, the only thing I would say for that is if you do have a town that's got like 5,000 people and you have two huge industries like a steel mill and a like some type of factory. Think about, do you have enough people in the town to support both? So that would be my, like, how many workers does a steel mill need? How many workers does a factory need? Is 5,000 people enough to support that? But if you have, say, like, um, a steel mill and a winery, you could have rivalries there in the sense of maybe it's like a family rivalry, or maybe it's like a historical for the town type of rivalry. But you probably have enough workers that you
Mhm.
could still have like that 5,000 people and have enough people to support the steel mill and the winery. What do you think, Nia?
Yeah, I think very true. And if anyone is writing a novel, you might be thinking, why do we need to know all this? If you're just writing a novel, you probably don't need to know all this. But the purpose of this is that because we're writing continuous short stories, we need more world. So that's why some of these things that might seem a little bit nitpicky, why it might be important for some people's stories, because they're like, um, they're trying to build a world that can maybe sustain maybe a dozen, 2 dozen, maybe 3 dozen. So I've seen some of these authors have hundreds of stories
Mm-hmm.
that they're writing that take place in or around, their initial small town. So um, as I feel like even if it's a neighboring town, if the towns are small enough that this new, you have a winery and a new winery just moves in the town next door. That could be enough of a, if you're like, oh, I've got this population, it doesn't make sense to have all these wineries, right? Because just the town is so small. But they might feel the rivalry even if it's the small town next door
Mm-hmm.
or on the other side of the county, because they feel like, oh, they're going to pull, my company's income over to theirs. It's going to be split because we can only sustain so much. So that could cause a rivalry or a conflict right there. So it doesn't necessarily, if you're like, eek, my town's really small, this doesn't make sense. Could be
Mm-hmm.
the town next door, and there goes the rivalry. And
I
also,
would.
so sorry, that means you need to make another town. Sorry.
I think I just read something. Well, but do you have to, or do you have to
Yeah,
make it a huge town? Because I just
yeah.
read.
You
I
could just
was
mention it.
It was a short, and it was small town, and the rivalry was actually um between the feed stores because it was a cowboy type of ranch
Mm-hmm.
kind of story. And so in all fairness, you don't really know this, but unless the person decides to go ahead and do it. But the basic premise was that someone from the next county over was coming to now buy from this feed store because that feed store was doing like crazy pricing, or they weren't supply demand type of conversation. um you never actually saw that other town. It's
Yeah,
just referenced. um, you never actually saw that other feed store. It's just referenced. Now eventually the author may expand and then do that town and do that feed store and then bring in the rivalry between the two. I don't know what that author's plans are, but yeah, it's just reference, but you can sense the budding kind of
yeah.
ooh, there could be a rivalry here type of a
And
conversation.
and I would say the bigger the industry, the harder it might be to make it a rivalry because of shipping. So,
Oh.
but with the smaller, especially smaller local, like Tiffany was saying with the feed store, if you had a local vegetable place, but farm that sold fresh vegetables to the local restaurants, that's very limited. So if
Hmm.
someone else starts up and says we're going to do the same thing, then you are taking those customers. So that's where a rivalry could come up. I think we saw this in, if you watch Gilmore Girls, and then there's another show, a current one that's done this a little bit, where there's like an organic place. What is that? I forget what the show is called, but they did this a couple times in the Gilmore Girls, where um, what's her name? Soki. I cannot remember the characters' names. It's been a while, guys. Where she's works in the restaurant in their hotel, and then in the end, but where she gets her vegetables from, when a new person slides in there and is like, "Hey, I got these vegetables," and she has to admit that the vegetables are better than her husband's vegetables, and she kind of wants to buy them, because that's limited supply, like limited people to buy the supply.
Hmm.
So that would definitely cause a rivalry.
And I mean, you can always, it doesn't have to be like huge industry. Like
Yeah, small
Peach
time.
Ridge is more of a tourist town. If I, granted, my town has like 3 hotels in it, even though I really only referenced like two. But um, like, let's say you have a town where, you know, it's a tourism town. You have 2 hotels, and then now this new chain that's supposed to be, say, like a Holiday Inn, or um Hilton or something, that has all these fancy things and all this different stuff, now wants to move in. Now you have a rivalry. If
Mhm.
you have a coffee shop and like
Coffee
a
shop's a good one.
Starbucks moves in, you have a rivalry. If you have like a bookstore and another bookstore moves in, you could have like 2 restaurants that are the same, that now is a
Mhm.
rivalry.
Yep.
Or I mean, there's so many different ways if you wanted to build in that rivalry, that it doesn't have to be like the main industry of the town.
Yeah.
that can still be considered industry that could start that rivalry. And I mean, you could work that into to tie it back to our whole topic. You could work that into the history of the town. You know, like um,
Our restaurant's been
maybe.
here for 120 years, and now this new hotshot restaurant is going
Mhm.
to come in with their franchise and try to take our business, you know.
Yeah. Or what if you have two siblings and one of them moved away and now their ancestor is coming, or their descendant is coming back, and they want to open up, like a new something. And here's the thing: if you did something like that, it may not even have to be a rivalry where you're bringing in a new industry. Maybe that descendant wants their piece of the winery.
Yeah.
And now you got a rivalry between these two cousins who are like, I'm sorry, we've always been here. We've been here for that 126 years. Where were you? And then you could bring that in. So look at like the different ways that you can work that in, and then work it into the history or to the current state of your town. Yes. Or Esther's got a good one.
Mhm.
Maybe the family sold the business and then an estranged family member buys it back. That's a good rivalry as well that you could do. Uh, my family loves a good rerun of the Andy Griffith Show too. That's what caught me.
Yeah.
uh, Guys, so we're gonna go ahead and take off. We've been here for a little while. Quick question for you. We have a number of different ideas for upcoming episodes of our podcast. We'll be back the first Saturday of April. Don't know the date, but is there something specific you guys want us to talk about with as far as building small towns for next time? Esther's writing a whole story over here with the drama. Oh, April 7th. That's what we're looking at, is when we will be back. Is there something specific that you guys want us to talk about? Or should we continue on with like, my next idea was coming up with the businesses of your town.
Oh,
That
did
or
I
the
just get really
people.
excited? Sorry. Don't-
Maybe we should do
I
the
got 5
businesses
more facial expressions.
because Nia just got real excited. Did y'all see her expression? Oh my gosh. Maybe we should do the businesses of your town.
Or anything you guys want. It's fine too.
Uh, oh, Renee got excited too. She said, yes, I love that. Okay, so April 7th, I'm going to have to write that down because y'all don't know. I think up until about four or 5 days ago, Nia and I both were like, what were we talking about this month? So yes, I'm going to write
It's
that
like
down. But yeah,
she finally
we
said
could do
it, so I looked it up. We're doing the history. I'm like, oh great, I love history. So yay.
So yeah, so we might come up with the idea of, yeah, let's talk about how to come up with the businesses. Okay, why don't we do that? Why don't we say, let's do that. Let's do businesses in April, and we will do, as Avery said, crafting small town characters in May.
Nice.
Which sounds fun. I feel like here's where we're gonna have a ball, because I feel like Nia, who loves world building and like putting all your stuff in your world and everything, is going to shine. In April, she's going to come with all of her businesses and like all the different things and all the places you might want to have and all the stuff. And then we're going to get to May, and I'm going to be like, let's talk that crazy Kurt person that's sitting in the corner of your coffee shop. And
Tiffany is
build a whole town
fantastic
around her.
with characters and character voices. Like, Spot on. I love Tiffany's character and character voices. So
So yeah, so I feel like this is where we're gonna have a ball. Is over the next two is coming up with what and then Tiff is gonna remind you of all the people that can be in it. I mean, like, yeah. Lots and lots of people. I have had to stop myself because I'm like, until I start writing all the books that I have planned for Peach Ridge, I cannot add another character. I just
yeah,
literally cannot. I'm y'all, I'm 3 books in and I think I have 70 something characters and y'all haven't even met like 50 of them.
so many characters, y'all.
Renee does have a question, and we'll go ahead and get to this before we take off. Curious, Nia, how long does it actually take you to build a town with all of your details?
Um, for me, it doesn't end. I I don't know. Because I just keep going. Um, but with each of my series, I do have a history. I have stories written out for the history and done to where I feel comfortable. Um, maybe that is so subjective. It's gonna really depend on how much detail. I can tell you
How
for
about
the
this?
two.
How why don't we break it down into this? How long do you think it takes you to okay, how long do you think it takes you to focus in on building a town before you're comfortable enough to start writing?
When I have the area taken care of, I need the area, the location. I need to know that really, really well. I need to know all of the places that I know are going to be in the stories that have popped in my head. I always write down the what stories I want, and I need to I need to have places for all of those to take place because I feel like I need to know where they're at and where I'm going. I can say working on two at a time, it took me maybe 6 months. But
Oh wow, really?
that's making maps, coming up with characters, coming up with with list of stories that can go with it, and knowing what the weather's like, what the region's like, and the history. So doing two stories, but I say that that's when I felt comfortable once I have those things and I have some stories ideas already. Like if I'm coming up with all of this stuff and I'm not getting any story ideas, I've got a problem because
Mm, mm.
I don't care enough about the place to put anybody there. So that's gonna get scrapped. But because I was writing with the pending one, because I was writing the novel at the same time, and then I'm like, oh goodness, I have this whole world. It just made it a lot easier. Um, with Ethereal Falls, the one that I'm writing under Nia James, I I had all these stories, but I'm always curious about what that world would look like now, and that's where these short stories came from. It's the modern iteration of what happened every time this world is destroyed and remade. Now we're here, and magic is so fleeting that they're like, if these humans destroy the world one more time, we mythics, we can't fix it. They're on their own. We're gonna bounce, and that's the world. The what seems like our modern world that we live in, where people are just having fun and playing with magic, but there is a bigger thing going on in the background. That so
Very
I
cool.
don't know how long I've been working on that story, but the modern iteration of the story, it did not take that long. Just because I already knew so much because I was already working on these stories. I already know so much about the magic and the the people who passed down the magic. I already knew so much of that. So it was just the geographical part of where am I gonna put these places, and you know how are the people who have a little bit of magic in their blood, how are they going to be drawn to this place? So
I
so
I would say
doing
it
put them
took
together
me,
6 months.
I would say maybe a month with Peach Ridge, maybe a month and a half, but I really feel like close to a month before I was comfortable enough to start writing. Like I felt like I knew enough to start writing.
Hmm.
Um, but there are certain things that I didn't know in that month. And I do agree with Nia in the sense of I would say my first three series I had in my head. Um, by the time I wrote the first story.
Yeah.
Which is why there was the orchard did come into play. The horse saloon did come into play. I originally knew the first family that was going to write the Walkers, which is the series that I'm in now. I knew them off the top of my head. That was because, as we discussed
Hmm.
previously, I get into the story through character, Nia gets in through place, and so I knew that these characters were the whole reason for me building Peach Ridge. Um, but I would say, yeah, maybe about a month, but also I had a town in mind of what I wanted Peach Ridge to kind of emulate.
Hmm.
And so for me, it was a lot of like, that town has a movie theater. Let's put a movie theater. That town has a lodge. Let's put a lodge. That town has, you know, a sporting goods store. Let's put a sporting goods store. That town has, it was a lot of that kind of a conversation. Oh, it's in Georgia. Of course,
Hmm.
we have to have some type of barbecue place. Okay, um,
Yeah.
like type of conversation. So it wasn't as much like, what do I want here?
Yeah.
Like, how do I want this town to build? How do I want this town to function? I knew it was going to be a tourist town. I knew it was going to be, it was going to have this history of originally starting out as kind of a farming town, and then have grown into that because that made sense for it to then become, this town that's kind of centered around the orchard, which is where a lot of their tourism comes in because people come picking, and is where they get their Christmas trees and all the different stuff.
Yeah.
Um, so look at it that way. I think the biggest thing that both of us said though is when you're comfortable and when you feel like you have stories.
Yeah.
If you don't have stories and you're building this town, it doesn't matter if you're building a town for a year, it doesn't matter if you're building it for like a day. If you
Hmm.
if you if you're not sparking story ideas,
Yeah.
um
And that is one of the things in the 6 months that I'm doing, I'm creating these two worlds. I'm coming up with story ideas, and when I don't know how to explain, but my outlines are almost zero drafts. So I'm writing at the same time as I'm
mm,
doing all this. So I have like a dozen stories that are outlined and partially written as I'm
I
doing
don't
this.
do that.
Yeah, I'm trying to change that because then I don't want to go back and finish them and edit them. So that is not great. But I also have, as I was creating the history for my pen name, I've got I have four short stories that actually take place during the history and with the couples that founded the town. I've got their stories outlined in short and fast drafted or really rough drafted. And then at the next important period of time in the town's history, I've got four short stories for, they're not the founding families, but they are families that are still prominent in the town. I've got stories outlined for those as well, if that makes sense. So I'm
Yeah.
I always say I'm like world building and writing. It's all happening at the same time. My process takes a long time also, but I don't know how to do it any other way because I've got the ideas in my head and that's how I have to get them out. So I always tell people don't necessarily do like I do because I know I do too much, but it's what works.
And I mean, it is on you. Esther, you gave plenty. Like we have a whole list now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Um, like it depends. Orion Harbor, we had a local legend. We knew there was a lighthouse, and we knew we wanted it to be a little bit kind of like a New England, Nantucket, oh, what's the Martha's Vineyard kind of vibe. Um, yeah, that's it. We knew nothing and jumped right into it. And we knew our first character was coming over from England to open a tea shop.
Mm.
And she couldn't cook. I'm not even positive we knew she couldn't cook until I wrote, or we wrote, Des wrote. One of us wrote the first scene, and like she screwed up the pumpkin pie. Literally, that's about when we knew she couldn't cook. Like, I'm not even positive we knew the people that were in the tea place with her. And we knew that she was going to go to a bookstore because she was going to need cookbooks. So we knew we had a tea house, and we had a cookbook, we had a bookstore, and at the end there was going to be a town Friendsgiving, because that was the whole idea, because it was a Thanksgiving type of story.
Mm-hmm.
So we knew that we had to have some place where she would run into other people and meet folks, and they would all come together for the town, or for her to have this Friendsgiving. Literally all we knew. And started writing, and everything grew from there. So yeah, wherever you're the most comfortable. Avery is saying I'm like the opposite. I can't create if I put too much in the world first. On my current map, I have Main Street and a few landmarks I knew I wanted to start with, but everything else I'm adding as I go, which is very true.
And that's actually what I tell people to do, because people are I always get asked, how do you do? I'm like, and I say, stop. If it's not fun for you, add what you need, add them as you go. I 100% advise that. I do more because honestly, this is the part of writing, not the actual writing or editing.
And I wish I had
the fun part for me. The fun part for me is actually creating the world.
Wait a minute, hold on. I can even tell you. I can show you, because I showed it to Nia, and she's like, "Oh, it's so cute." And I was like, "It sucks," and she's like, "No, it's cute." This is the first drawing of a town called Christmas.
Yep, and I was like, that is perfect.
And literally, it started off with right here, because I knew I needed a tree. So therein lies the tree in the center of the town. And that was it. And then I just kind of like went from there. And like there's a moment where Miss Abilene walks from her house to the church. And so I knew I needed the houses on one side and I needed the church on the other.
Yep. That is exactly, that is perfect. That is perfect. And I tell people, just that is going to go with, put that map that you're sketching out, put that right with your history and world building blank page, and just bullet point them in as you add them in the story. And that's when you need it. And then they're a reference for you when something comes up. They're a reference for you when something needs to be added, and just keep adding to it. And before you know it, by the time you've written several stories, you've got world building, you've got a story Bible that's starting, and you've got a map of some sort. And that's perfect.
And I think that if we leave you with nothing else, that right there, put what you need, or build what you need, and write it down. Whether that is business, whether that is history, whether that is people. Build what you need, write it down, and go from there. It will all come together. So guys, thanks for joining us. We will be back April 7th. I remember the date Nia looked up for us. And we will be talking about the businesses of your town and how you can put those together. If you have any questions, as always, leave them in the comments below or reach out to either of us. I have all of our links actually in the boxy box this time, because
it's April 6th.
I'm good like that. No, it's because I actually copied and pasted. But I have all of our stuff down there, as well as websites, Oh, okay. It's April 6th.
Yeah, my
Sorry.
bad. When you change your calendars from Sunday start to Monday start, it shifts things. And I'm like, wait a minute.
Okay, April 6th. We'll be back. And we will be talking, like I said, about the businesses. If you have any questions in the meantime, if you just need some help or guidance or anything like that, by all means, reach out to us. I even have both of our websites down there today, guys. Like, I'm on top of this. What? Again, just copy paste. Don't blow my head up. So we will see you back here in April. Bye, guys.